Time for chapter dos. And principle number 2 of Noam Chomsky's Requiem for an American Dream, How We Got Here, is to shape ideology. And most of this started with the 70s during the Nixon administration. He writes, there has been an enormous, concentrated, coordinated business offensive beginning in the 70s to try to beat the egalitarian efforts that went right through the Nixon years. So the boom civil rights of the 60s, the Civil Rights Act, Martin Luther King, Kennedy's Robert Kennedy, the EPA was passed by Ralph Nader, the Mine and Safety Act, OSHA, what else? He got seatbelts. I don't know if that was an act. He got seatbelts. Not safe at any speeds was Ralph Nader's book, and what came along was the Powell Memorandum, Powell, and this said that the most persecuted class in the United States is the capitalist class. The owners, the very rich, were totally persecuted. Everything's been taken over by raving leftists, Ralph Nader included. The media, the universities, but we have the money so we can fight back. Obviously, they're the capitalists. And what we have to do is use our economic power to save what we call freedom, meaning our power. That was the Powell Memorandum. What is important about the Powell Memorandum, and I'll read a little bit more at the end of this video, is that man, Lewis F. Powell, who was a corporate lawyer, ended up becoming a Supreme Court justice appointed by Nixon. It's insane. And this memorandum ended up leaking later after he became a Supreme Court justice, in which he indicts Ralph Nader explicitly. And he ends up deciding on some very important Supreme Court cases about money in politics, like Buckley v. Valado and Boston v. Bellotti. Another organization that also saw an excess of democracy was the Trilateral Commission. It's a liberal international institution from the three major industrial capitalist entities, Europe, Japan, North America. The complexion of it is illustrated by the fact that the Carter administration was drawn almost completely from the ranks, so that's the opposite extreme within the political spectrum. Now, they were appalled by the democratizing tendencies of the 60s and thought we have to react to it. They were concerned that there was an excess of democracy. The young, women, old, working people, and what they call special interests were beginning to organize and try to enter the political arena. So, the current economic system, which I call regulated capitalism, I'll call it, was bringing up large sections of the industrialized world, at least. And, we were colonizing Africa still and doing terrible things and extracting all their resources, but there was a global middle class developing, and they were starting to ask for rights. And they had to respond to this, and the way they did it was economically, really, through debt peonage, which I'll go to. And the Trilateral Commission, Noam Chomsky writes, went on to offer measures to reinstitute better indoctrination to control the press, drive people back into apathy, and let the right kind of society develop. Across the spectrum, you have various proposals, and they've been implemented. One thing he talks about is education. He literally talks about, after this time, after the Trilateral Commission, colleges were designed to have closed spaces and not open spaces, so that college students basically couldn't form and, group together to go on a strike or, address a civil cause. He also talks about, obviously, debt peonage. So how did that happen in college? Well, in the 70s, college tuition started to climb by ridiculous levels. Again, I don't think we have documents to show this was specifically planned, but you can see the consequences. For one thing, it derives large parts of the population of the options of higher education. It deprives. But even those who are able to go through it, most of them end up trapped by debt. If a student comes out of college with $100,000 in debt, they're trapped. There are very few options they can pursue. So what he talks about, instead of getting out of college and maybe being, an environmental lawyer or doing something, that isn't in the corporatocracy, that isn't just for money, isn't in the face of neoliberalism, you can't. You immediately have to go make money because you're in debt peonage. That's another way of enslavement, is you have to work for me because of debt peonage. Pretty much, he also writes, the same thing is happening in kindergarten through 12th grade. The tendency in K through 12 is reducing education to mechanical skills and undermining creativity and independence. Yep, that's what I went through, both on the part of teachers and students. That's what teaching to the test is, no child left behind, race to the top. I don't know what that means. I think these should be regarded as methods of indoctrination and control. Of course, one of the other ways to do that was simply to reduce or eliminate free education. The rise of the charter school system is also a very thinly disguised effort to destroy the public school system. Charter schools are a way of drawing public funds into private institutions. This will undermine the public school system. You don't get better performance even with all the advantages and so on, and that's what's happening across the board, so destroy public institutions. So public institutions money to collectively make a better society by paying for schools, firemen, police. When you do private schools and then people actually have to pay for that, you make collective institutions privatize, and thus only the rich or people who have the money to afford these things that everyone is putting their money in because they're taking money from public funds can't afford, which is sad. So then, you reserve good education for the elites, for the people who also reinforce your ideology. I think. Another thing he talks about in reshaping the ideology is condemnation of critics. The notion of being anti-American, he writes, is quite an interesting one. It's actually a totalitarian notion. It isn't used in free societies. If someone illy criticized Berlusconi or the corruption of the Italian state, they're not called anti-Italian. In fact, if they were called anti-Italian, people would collapse in laughter in the streets of Rome. In totalitarian states, the notion is used. In the old Soviet Union, dissidents were called anti-Soviet. Okay, so he writes about the only reason you would face, what people are really attacking is corporate power, and corporate power now is fused with the government in Noam Chomsky's interpretation. And so to do that is, sacred, to make fun of the sacred American values, because it's, in some weird way, it's fused with American values, but it's not. It's anti-American to have, concentrated power in the hands of the elite. That is what I believe we rebelled against, or at least what is taught. And then the next chapter is redesigning the economy. Let me read the Powell memo. He has a few notes about it in the end. He writes, this is quotes from the Powell memo. This was written in 1971. No thoughtful person can question that the American economic system is under broad attack. This varies in scope, intensity, in the techniques employed, and in the level of visibility. The sources are varied and diffused. They include, not unexpectedly, the communists, the new leftists, and other revolutionaries. Big idea to call someone a communist in 1971, if my critique of history, Cold War, is correct, who would destroy the entire system, both political and economic. These extremists of the left are far more numerous, better financed, and increasingly are far more welcomed and encouraged by the elements of society than ever before in our history. But they remain a small minority and are not yet the principal cause for concern. So that is pretty vicious attack on what he calls the left, or what he calls, social causes. Economic reform in terms of Ralph Nader challenging corporate power. He also writes this, perhaps the most effective antagonist of American business is Ralph Nader, who thanks largely to the media has become a legend in his own time and an idol of millions of Americans. A recent article in Fortune speaks of Nader as follows: the passion that rules in him, and he is a passionate man, is aimed at smashing utterly the target of his hatred, which is corporate power. So the Powell Memorandum is amazing in that, first of all, the guy who wrote it went on to be a Supreme Court judge, which is very important because there was a swing vote in a 5-4 case, Buckley v. Valeo, which basically consecrated that a corporation has First Amendment rights, which was the end of money in politics. That was worse than Citizens United. It established that a corporation has First Amendment rights. and it has a right to free speech. I got to do another video on that podcast. Guys, follow me on Twitter. If you're liking the videos, let me know how I'm doing, and I would love it if you gave me a little moolah on Patreon, and let me know what you like. Also, subscribe to my podcast if you really like this, and have a great day. Podcast is in the comments below.